I wasn't planning on this review, but someone asked I compare the topping NX4 to the Ikko Zerda. I figured I might as well compare to all the USB dongle DACs that I have. This is the head-to-head-to-head-to-head comparison between the NX4 and Ikko Zerda, Audioquest Cobalt, and Monolith USB DAC. There are several things that the USB dongle DACs have in common, and little in common they have with the NX4. The Zerda, Monolith, and Cobalt are all of similar size. The Zerda and Cobalt have very good metal build, with the Zerda as the clear winner in that category. The Monolith is the cheapest and, barring a faulty unit, sounds practically the same as the Cobalt. The Zerda has an optical output in its 3.5mm port. None of the other devices in this comparison can boast that. The Zerda comes in either USB-C or Lightning formats. There is no USB-A connection, unlike the Cobalt and Monolith. None of the devices in this video share the same DAC, however all but the Zerda use DACs from the same manufacturer. The Cobalt, Monolith, and NX4 all use Sabre DACs, and that is apparent in the listening tests. The Zerda uses a Cirrus Logic DAC chipset. None of these devices exhibited noise or distortion. There are some who claim that the Monolith USB DAC has channel imbalance, is grainy or noisy, but that has never been my experience. Monolith build quality with the USB DAC is touch and go. Anyone who experiences poor performance from the Monolith should demand an exchange unit. Audioquest has not had blemish-free reputation either. The Cobalt has faulty 3.5mm jacks that either are not soldered in properly or are not secured into the housing. Volume matching was the most difficult thing in this test. None of the devices have a digital readout for precise volume control. Moreover, the Monolith DAC has volume buttons on the side, which is independent of the Windows volume control. I found my preferred volume on the NX4 at low gain. The volume knob remained around 11 o'clock. Although I played around with the gain and bass switches, I did not factor them into the listening comparisons. I used the LCD-1 as my headphones because I wanted the headphones to be a non-factor. I simply wanted something that any of these devices could power. The most immediate thing you will notice when jumping from one DAC to another is, well, hardly any difference. Sound signature alone, there are very minor alterations. All of these devices have a fairly similar bass response. The NX4 seems to have just a slight bass emphasis with the filters disengaged. That emphasis is probably no more than a few decibels. Bass response in the USB dongle DACs was very difficult to distinguish. If I were forced to provide a general impression for each, it would be this. The Monolith has just a tiny less bass emphasis than the Cobalt. This is by no more than 1 to 2 decibels. Neither DAC emphasized sub-bass. The Zerda sounds very close to the Cobalt, but possibly has a tiny bit more bass emphasis. Frankly, the differences were so minor that it's safer to conclude that the bass response is practically the same amongst all these USB dongle DACs. All three dongle DACs had similar mids and treble presentation, but there were noticeable differences here and there. The Zerda seems to have a slightly smoother mids presentation, and the Monolith sounds more analytical. The Cobalt sits somewhere in between. All three have plenty of treble energy, but the Monolith provided a few decibels more emphasis when volume matched. The Zerda and Cobalt performed about the same, that is, both had rolled off treble that was not harsh. All these differences are once again very slight. After a lengthy period of back and forth, you might pick out nuanced alterations between the devices. If you dislike the sound of one, the sound signature of the others will not change significantly. Fanboys might disagree, but that's just too bad for them. The NX4 compared to the dongle DACs is also very difficult to distinguish. The NX4 has deeper bass than all the USB dongle devices, but only by a little bit. And the NX4 has a bit more bass emphasis, just slightly, maybe by a few decibels. The NX4 does not have the smoothest presentation of the mids. That remains the Ikko Zerda's territory, again, marginally. The mids on the NX4 sound practically the same as the Cobalt. In some songs, the Monolith seems to provide slightly more clarity in the mids than the NX4. The NX4 has rolled off treble very similar to the Zerda and Cobalt. Monolith's treble, in comparison, was a few decibels elevated. None of the DACs in this comparison sound harsh or grainy. The Monolith signature leans ever so slightly towards more clarity and treble extension. The Zerda has a smooth mids presentation that makes even harsh recording sound more pleasant. The Cobalt has a combination of the Zerda and Monolith sound, not too smooth and not too harsh. Where does the NX4 fit into this? It is likely very close to the Cobalt signature. Comparing different DAC chipsets is an easier task than comparing chipsets from the same manufacturer. This is because manufacturers make very slight alterations in the sound character from one generation to another. If I were comparing Burr Brown or Wolfson DACs to the NX4, Zerda, Monolith, or Cobalt, I have no doubt there would be far more noticeable differences. But within the same manufacturer, the question is harder to answer. Some might say that of course they can hear the differences, and to them I say, well, good for you. Differences do exist, but are incredibly slight. This is why asking which sounds better is a silly question. The NX4, Cobalt, and Monolith are within millimeters of each other. The Zerda has a marginally different signature than the rest. Again, it is not a huge difference, and in A and B tests you might hear it only once in a while. When you are down to these four devices, the issue of sound signature is far less important than overall functionality. If you need a pocketable DAC that has no frills, then any of the USB dongle DACs will do the job equally well. If you want something with power, gain, and bass switches, then the NX4 is a great option. Unless you are absolutely convinced of Audioquest's superiority, or you are married to the Tidal ecosphere, you should consider any of the alternatives before purchasing the Cobalt. The Cobalt costs $300. For 1/3 the price, you can get the Zerda or Monolith, and the Monolith regularly fluctuates between $60 and $100. For about $150, or half the price of the Cobalt, the NX4 provides substantial more power, a bass filter, gain switch, a volume knob, and a line in or out. In other words, the NX4 has more noteworthy features than the Cobalt. If you really must use Tidal and want MQA support, I guess you're stuck with the Cobalt. Oh wait, you can get MQA and high-resolution audio from the hifi hip DAC at half the price of the Cobalt.